In April 1955, the Union of European Football Associations, UEFA, established the European Cup, a football competition for the champion clubs of UEFA-affiliated nations, to begin in the 1955-56 season. However, the English League winners, Chelsea, were denied entry by the Football League's secretary, Alan Hardacre, who believed not participating was best for English football. The following season, the English League was won by Manchester United, managed by Matt Busby. The Football League again denied their champions entry, but Busby and his chairman, Harold Hardman, with the help of the Football Association's FA chairman Stanley Rouse, defied the league and United became the first English team to play in Europe. The team, known as the Busby Babes for their youth, reached the semi-finals, beaten there by the eventual winners, Real Madrid. Winning the first division title again that season meant qualification for the 1957-58 tournament, and their semi-final run in 1956-57 meant they were one of the favorites to win. Domestic league matches were on Saturdays and European matches midweek, so, although air travel was risky, it was the only choice if United were to fulfill their league fixtures, which they would have to do if they were to avoid proving Hardacre right. After overcoming Shamrock Rovers and Dukla Prague in the preliminary and first round respectively, United were drawn with Red Star Belgrade of Yugoslavia, now Serbia, for the quarterfinals. After beating them 2-1 at Old Trafford on January 14, 1958, the club was to travel to Yugoslavia for the return leg on 5th of February. On the way back from Prague in the previous round, fog over England prevented the team from flying back to Manchester, so they flew to Amsterdam before taking the ferry from the Hook of Holland to Harwich and then the train to Manchester. The trip took its toll on the players and they drew 3-3 with Birmingham City at St Andrews 3 days later. Eager not to miss Football League fixtures, and not to have a difficult trip again, the club chartered a British European Airways, BEA, plane from Manchester to Belgrade for the away leg against Red Star. The match was drawn 3-3 but it was enough to send United to the semi-finals. After takeoff, the plane skidded off the end of the runway, crashed into the fence surrounding the airport and across a road before its port wing was torn off as it caught a house, home to a family of 6. The father and eldest daughter were away and the mother and the other 3 children escaped as the house caught fire. Part of the plane's tail was torn off before the left side of the cockpit hit a tree. The right side of the fuselage hit a wooden hut, inside which was a truck filled with tires and fuel, which exploded. On seeing flames around the cockpit, Thane feared that the aircraft would explode and told his crew to evacuate the area. The stewardesses, Rosemary Cheverton and Margaret Bellis, were the first to leave through a blown-out emergency window in the galley, followed by radio officer Rogers. Raymond was trapped in his seat by the crumpled fuselage and told Thane to go without him. Thane clambered out of the galley window. On reaching the ground, he saw flames growing under the starboard wing, which held 500 imperial gallons, 2,300 liters, of fuel. He shouted to his crew to get away and climbed back into the aircraft to retrieve 2 handheld fire extinguishers, stopping to tell Raymond he would be back when the fires had been dealt with. Meanwhile, in the cabin, goalkeeper Harry Gregg was regaining consciousness, thinking that he was dead. He felt blood on his face and didn't dare put his hand up. He thought the top of his head had been taken off, like a hard-boiled egg. Just above him, light shone into the cabin, so Gregg kicked the hole wide enough for him to escape. He also managed to save some passengers, among them teammates Bobby Charlton and Dennis Viole, who were strapped into their seats away from the wreckage. The aftermath of the crash left 20 people, including 7 of Manchester United's players, dead at the scene of the crash. The 21st victim was Frank Swift, a journalist and former goalkeeper who played with Busby at Manchester City. He died on his way to hospital. Duncan Edwards died from his injuries on 21st of February at the Rechtsser Hospital in Munich, and the final death toll reached 23 several days later when co-pilot Raymond died as a result of serious head injuries. Johnny Berry and Jackie Blanchflower were both injured so severely that they never played again.
When I got out of the plane, the hoses, the firemen had arrived, so I must have had a blackout. And the first person I saw when I got out was who looked alive was Mr. Busby. The others, everybody else, are unconscious. So I stayed with Mr. Busby and tried to keep him warm, you know. I was rubbing his hands and kept trying to keep him comfortable, but he seemed to be in really bad shape, you know. So very shortly the stretchers arrived and I helped him on the stretcher and went over him to hospital.
Busby was seriously injured and had to stay in hospital for more than 2 months after the crash, and was given the last rites twice. After being discharged from hospital, he went to Switzerland to recuperate in Interlaken. At times, he felt like giving up football entirely, until he was told by his wife, Jean, "You know, Matt, the lads would have wanted you to carry on." That statement lifted Busby from his depression, and he returned by land and sea to Manchester, before watching his team play in the 1958 FA Cup final. In the meanwhile, there was speculation that the club would fold, but a Threadbare United team completed the 1957-58 season, with Busby's assistant Jimmy Murphy standing in as manager. He had not travelled to Belgrade as he was in Cardiff managing the Wales national team at the time. A team largely made up of reserve and youth team players beat Sheffield Wednesday 3-0 in the first match after the disaster. The programme for that match showed simply a blank space where each United player's name should have been. With 7 players dead, Edwards died just over 24 hours later, and with only Greg and Folks fit to play out of the surviving players, United were desperate to find replacements with experience, so Murphy signed Ernie Taylor from Blackpool and Stan Crowther from Aston Villa. 3 players, Derek Lewin, Bob Hardesty, and Warren Bradley, were transferred to United on short-term contracts by non-league club Bishop Auckland. Bradley was the only one of the 3 players to play for the first team, and the only one to sign a permanent contract. The remaining places in the team were filled by reserve players including Shea Brennan and Mark Pearson. United's fierce rivals Liverpool offered them 5 loan players to help put a side together. United only won 1 more league game in the 1957-58 season after the crash, causing their title challenge to collapse, and they felt, and also managed to beat Milan at Old Trafford in the European Cup semi-finals, only to lose 4-0 at the San Siro. Real Madrid, who went on to win the trophy for the 3rd year running, suggested that Manchester United be awarded the trophy for that year, a suggestion supported by Red Star Belgrade, but this failed to materialize. After the tragedy, UEFA floated the idea of Manchester City taking United's place in the European Cup had United not been able to fulfill their fixtures, but this was rejected by all parties involved, City in particular. Busby resumed managerial duties the next season, 1958-59. Real Madrid offered to loan Alfredo Di Stefano until the end of the 58-59 season for half his wages, but the transfer was blocked by the FA as it would prevent a British player to take that spot in the team. Madrid instead raised funds and organised charity-friendly matches with Manchester. Eventually, Busby built a second generation of Busby babes, including George Best and Dennis Law, that 10 years later won the European Cup by beating 2-time winners Benfica. Charlton and Folks were the only 2 crash survivors who lined up in that team. A fund for dependents of victims of the crash was established in March, and chaired by the chairman of the FA, Arthur Drury. The fund had raised £52,000, equivalent to £1.29 million as of 2021, by the time of its disbursement in October 1958. first memorials at Old Trafford to the lost players and staff were unveiled on February 25, 1960. The first, a plaque in the shape of the stadium with the image of a green pitch, inscribed with the names of the victims in black and gold glass, was placed above the entrance to the director's box. Above the plaque was a teak carving of a player and a supporter, heads bowed either side of a wreath and a football inscribed with the date 1958. The plaque was designed by Manchester architect J. Vipond and constructed by Messrs. Giaconello, Manchester, Limited at a cost of £2,100, and unveiled by Matt Busby. Also unveiled that day was a memorial to the members of the press who died at Munich, which consisted of a bronze plaque that named the 8 lost journalists. It was unveiled by crash survivor Frank Taylor on behalf of the Football Writers Association. The original plaque was stolen in the 1980s and replaced by a replica now behind the counter in the press entrance. The final memorial was the Munich clock, a simple two-faced clock paid for by the ground committee and attached to the southeast corner of the stadium, with the date February 6, 1958 at the top of both faces and Munich at the bottom. The clock has remained in the same position since it was first installed. The clock was unveiled on February 25, 1960 by Dan Marston, the chairman of the ground committee. When the stadium was renovated in the mid-1970s, the plaque had to be moved from the director's entrance to allow the necessary changes. The plaque could not be removed without damaging it, so the old memorial was walled up within the main stand and a new memorial was made, simpler than the original, now consisting simply of a slate pitch with the names inscribed upon it, and installed in 1976.